Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sustainable Finance Podcast. My name is Paul Ellis, and I'm your host for these programs about developments in this fast-growing industry. Today's podcast guests are a trio of leaders engaged in community economic development. John Holdsclaw IV, Gloria Mirrione, and Harold Pettigrew Jr. are on a mission to lift the banner of capital meets purpose. And I'll ask Harold and John to share their thoughts on this theme for the upcoming 39th Annual Opportunity Finance Network Conference next month. But first, I want our followers to know that John, who's the president and CEO of Rochdale Capital, and Harold, the president and CEO of Opportunity Finance Network, joined this episode at Gloria's request. So I want to say a few words about our sponsor, Acre, where Gloria leads the Sustainable Finance and Impact Investing team for the Americas. If you're tuning into this podcast, then you already understand the crucial role finance plays in the transition to a sustainable future. With the right individuals leading the way in top companies, sustainability becomes more than just a buzzword. That's why we're excited to have Acre as our sponsor. As a world-leading sustainability search and recruitment company, Acre enables organizations to create real change by embedding and developing purpose-driven people in their teams. Visit the Acre website to learn more about their latest opportunities or to get in touch about building your perfect team. Hello, John, Gloria, and Harold, and welcome to the Sustainable Finance Podcast.
Thanks for having us,
Paul. Thanks for having us, Paul.
Yes, it's our great pleasure to have you join us today. And we're going to start by asking Harold first to tell us about the Opportunity Finance Network Conference and from the perspective of the convener. And then, John, I'll ask you to chime in as someone who attends every year. Go ahead.
Absolutely, Paul. Thank you. Happy to be here and happy to talk about the conference. Every year, OFN, the Opportunity Finance Network, holds a premier convening for the community development finance industry. This is where over 2,100 people come to attend to talk through different challenges and areas of investment in small business and housing, and from grocery stores and food deserts to community facilities and healthcare facilities, and as well climate. Which is a big topic of focus across our industry. We're going to be convening in Washington, D.C., October 15th through the 18th, and tickets are selling pretty hot for this. So we anticipate a sellout for the conference. And so we certainly encourage from public to private, corporate partners and stakeholders to join us in the discussion.
Great. John, tell us about the conference from the point of view of someone who attends every year.
Thank you again, Paul, and thank you, Gloria. And I'm always honored to be on anything with Harold. He's far more eloquent than I am. This is the Super Bowl of CDFI conferences. This is the one that you have to, I plan my outfits. I have everything down to, the very minute. I mean, it is the one place where you get not only CDFI practitioners, but you also get the foundations, you also get government agencies, you also get, mainstream banks. And so again, it's that one opportunity to bring everyone together. And it's that one can't miss. My wife may not know all the conferences that I go to, but the first thing she asked me is, when is OFN in October? Because she knows that's the one I'm going to be gone to from probably Monday or Sunday to Friday. So it's the conference to attend if you are a CDFI.
Terrific. Well, thanks for that. Thanks for that big vote of confidence. And Gloria, I'm going to ask you to start with our first question. What is a CDFI? You brought these two great guests in for this program. Tell us about your perspective on what they do.
Well, thank you for asking. And, quite frankly, I think, I want to thank my guests. I'm super thrilled about, bringing you both together and, in a world of really impactful leaders. I'm just so glad that the both of you were able to join. Look, I think, for my career, I've spent a lot of time helping organizations, specifically financial institutions, find, identify, even help develop their talent. And, for CDFIs, I became aware, supportive of CDFIs probably about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And, what I've noticed is that, the talent that CDFIs have and need is just so critical for the communities that they support. It just is so critical. And, given what CDFIs do, and the explanation that Harold and John both made, to me, it's not only part of what I do, but it's embedded in who I am. So I think that really, underscores the reason why I brought these two together and why I'm committed to ensuring that CDFIs are successful.
Terrific. So, Harold, what's your reason for operating a CDFI as the CEO and president, and in addition to that, putting on a conference like you do every year?
Absolutely. And I'm happy to baseline a little bit too. So CDFIs, the secret is kind of in the name, Community Development Financial Institutions. And when you think about CD, that gives you the mission, but we're financial institutions. Our primary focus is to make sure that capital is getting to places, and this is people and communities all across the country that can't access traditional capital. That's the simplest articulation. So you have organizations across the country, over 1,400, that are committed to this purpose, that are all in common cause to make sure that capital is reaching parts of the country where it's needed most. This comes in the form of community development banks, community development credit unions, community development venture capital funds, as well as community development loan funds and green banks. And so just to bring it all together, that this tapestry of all of these different types of organizations all fall under the banner of CDFI. All of our organizations are designated by Treasury, and so it's not just a self-designation. It's actually verified annually through certification that we are meeting mission, that we're investing resources in communities that ultimately need it most. And so it's a designation by the Department of Treasury and the CDFI fund itself, that we are mission-driven institutions investing all across the country. It's an industry that represents over $250 billion in assets under management. And it's probably closer to 500 billion when you look at total assets on balance sheet and off balance sheet. And so when you look at all the areas of investment across the country, as I mentioned in parallel to the conference, small business, housing, climate and sustainable finance to grocery stores, and you name the asset class, CDFIs are invested. And so that's what the industry represents, financial institutions that are all mission driven.
Terrific. So now, John, I'm going to ask you to look at the role for our followers that CDFIs play and can continue to play in the world of ESG and sustainable finance. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Definitely. And it's a great question, Paul. I mean, when I think about CDFIs, I think about them as the first resort or the last resort for any prospective borrower, entrepreneur, community-based organization. And so I think when you look at the whole sustainability piece around ESG and others that is on the rise and is everywhere you look, you see whether this job is either somebody's hiring an ESG person here, somebody's hiring an ESG person here. You've got the greenhouse gas reduction fund money that's going to be coming out here really soon. That's going to be transformative to a lot of the under-resourced communities that we serve. I'll say one thing just to piggyback on Harold. I think during COVID, CDFIs have been around for a while, but I think CDFIs really earned that mantra or that title of being financial first responders. And so it only makes sense that in this next phase, as we think about ESG and sustainability and the financing of that CDFIs have a place there as well, And so again, one of the things you'll notice about me is that you'll never hear me say low income. You'll never hear me say moderate income. You always hear me say under resourced, because at the end of the day, the communities that we serve all want access to something. And so I think that this is just another chapter in regards to creating that access, be it community solar, be it addressing equity issues as it relates to things that have happened in like Flint, Michigan, and other places where you have institutional and systematic racism that has robbed communities of so much for so long. Again, I just think that it's just the next step. And my challenge to my CDFI compadres is, we need to upskill and learn about all of these things from a sustainability standpoint for us to really be effective. And so I just think that it's just an obvious next step for us as a movement that we take part in this very important part of society that's coming on very strongly right now.
Great. So now, Harold, can you identify the biggest obstacles that CDFIs are facing to make impact in ESG and with the sustainable investment and impact industry?
Absolutely. And just coming off of John's comments, there's a couple things to lift up about the industry, right? Like we're working in the places where, as John mentioned, are most under-resourced. So our challenge day in and day out is making sure that capital not only reach those people, but reach communities, like I said, where it's needed most. And so what we do day in and day out, just to level set, like roughly 83% of CDFI clients are low wealth, low income, underserved. And I know, and I take your point too, John, and that's ultimately what we're talking about, is being distributors of resources, to places ultimately. But the intention behind it, I do think, requires us to call it out. That what we are talking about is the importance of investing in communities of color, investing in those that have not been able to access the benefits and the positives of growing their income and wealth within our financial system. We have to be intentional about where we're investing. And that's where CDFIs flourish. 30% of our investments are in rural communities. Over 60% are with people in communities of color. And so what we do day in and day out has intention, because the only way that you can combat intention is with intention. And so that's important. That's extremely important for us. One other point just to mention, and there are challenges, to helping communities to transition into a clean energy future. There's plenty of challenges. One, the evolution of technology, and for all of us just getting on board and understanding what those are. Two, clean energy transition is kind of the next wave of investment that's coming down. I think it's not just a challenge for CDFIs, but our entire financial industry and system to begin adjusting to make sure that our communities aren't left behind. Because we know that typically happens when we have infusions of major capital. You look at the waves of industrial revolution and change that's happened over the last number of centuries. We've seen our communities left behind. And so our charge has been to make sure that our communities aren't left behind, and that we are, as John mentioned, not only financial first responders when there's a disaster or disruption, but every day, to make sure that capital is flowing. And that's been our charge overall. You have no better example of that than what John has been leading at Rochdale, and making sure not only through concept, but through intention, that from community ownership and small business and housing, conceptually, what John has been leading and the impact that the Rochdale team has had has been instrumental. It's just one example of over 1,400 across the country of organizations and leaders that are deeply committed to move the dial in our communities.
Great. So now, Gloria, you said you've been working with this industry for many years as well. Give us your perspective on what the obstacles are today.
Yeah, I think, I probably can't say it any better than John and Harold just did. But what I will add is that, is watching the several crises, right, that we've had over the last, let's call it, just in my career, 20 years, Katrina, the housing crisis of 2009 and then COVID. Right, just watching some of those crises and the impact and the critical support that CDFIs gave to communities, I think is in and of itself a great explanation. And what I'm here to do, I think, in the perspective I can give, and it'll be a question that I'll ask and pose to John and Harold, is how, from the talent perspective, right, can someone like me be helpful? Because in order to execute on a purpose or a mission, right, you need to have the people behind it. So, and I think that to me is where I, and my commitment and my passion is to make sure that we can enable those CDFIs across the country to get get to the underserved and under-resourced areas, and to make sure that there are people being creative and getting behind what CDFIs stand for.
Okay. So, John and Harold, the CDFI fund was signed into law September 23rd of 1994. Can each of you give us an example of what the impact of that fund has been in your experience and in your communities during the last almost 30 years now?
I'm happy to take that first one. I will say for the audience that I am a recovering government relations professional, so don't judge me. But I think when the Regal Act was passed, and what a lot of people may not know is that President Clinton at the time modeled the CDFI fund after the work that Shore Bank had done in Chicago. He started Southern Bancorp in Arkansas, and the rest is history. And one of the things that Harold talked about before in regards to the assets under management and whatnot, you've also seen a 40% increase in the number of CDFIs since 2019. But I think that just like everything, once people hear about the impact, once people hear about the things that they're doing, and just to piggyback on the last question about what the biggest obstacles are, and for someone like us as a loan fund, it's always going to be access to capital. And so I think this is where corporate and philanthropic folks can help out tremendously. Listen, I was a government relations professional for years and asked people for billions of dollars, but it's harder for me to ask for a $50,000 planning grant than any other thing that I've done in my career, because it's all very new. And I just wanted to quickly give two examples, and I want to thank Harold for the kind words. I can't take credit for this. This is Marla's saying, but he definitely has been an amazing partner in purpose. And number one, and while I may have a few years on him, has really helped me tremendously and served in a mentor role as a new CEO. But we just did an amazing loan in Lewiston, Maine. They found out in this one part of the town where it has a high population of minority and a very high Islamic population as well, is that all of the students were performing very bad in standardized tests. We'll come to find out that many of the students were suffering from lead poisoning, and the lead poisoning was causing these scores to be as bad as they were. So the John T. Gorman Foundation came in and really invested. Again, here's a philanthropic entity that came in and invested in this community. And so one of the things that we just did was we just closed a deal on a 10-unit affordable housing deal there on Pine Street. But what made it fascinating was that because it's the Islamic community, they don't believe in interest. So we had to make it a fee-based loan. And so there's no interest there. And so this is another thing that I wanted to say about the differentiation of what we do as an organizations. Our loan committee will say, look, put it out there, and then they'll start rolling up their sleeves, and they'll give it their best shot to try to get us to close a loan or get a loan approved. Doesn't always happen, but again, I would rather have that effort than not have it at all. But again, if that's not a modern example of what ESG means to communities, if somebody would have just said, well, their tests are not good, and this kind of stuff happens, and didn't dig a little deeper to figure out that lead problem was there, who would have taken that on? And again, this wasn't a huge loan; it was $412,000, and but again, it transformed that 10 units of affordable housing for those folks, and we were able to do that. So I just wanted to. That might have been 8 answers in one question, but Harold's saying some great things, and my mind is going. And so I just want to make a few more touch points. But the Regal Act, in my mind, will always go down as one of the most important pieces of legislation since the New Deal to help the under-resourced communities today. I can't say that enough.
Okay. So, Harold, if we look at your work, and John as well, through a racial equity lens, how can ESG be used to improve it in this country today?
Yeah, and I think it's wonderful coming off of John's example, and it gives a great lens into the secret sauce, of why From a community development finance standpoint, CDFIs across the country are so important. It's not only that we're anchored in mission, but also the creativity that's needed to get capital where it ultimately needs to be in under-resourced communities, right? And so when you look at that lens, particularly from a social standpoint, the intention in which the industry moves to invest in communities of color is important and is central to our work. I mentioned before, 83% or 60% rather of our investments are in communities of color. I led a CDFI before coming to OFN, led it for 7 years. We were investing over 90% from a small business standpoint into entrepreneurs of color, specifically Black entrepreneurs, because we knew there was an economic imperative in the Washington, D.C. region, specifically when you look at the racial wealth divide. And so it was important for us to align our investments with where the challenges were most. And we know definitively that we have issues in our country along racial lines. The racial wealth divide is pervasive across the country in every community that we face across the country. And so ESG is important, but it's important to drill down in terms of what that means. I always like to, you'll hear me say often in my public comments that, words matter, intention matters, and so when we talk about the S, the social element, what do we mean by that? Specifically, we have to have a racial lens to how we invest. For moral reasons, yes, we can attack it from that lens, but I often insert this lens too. What if we unlock the fullest of potential in our communities across the country through investment? We've been succeeding as a country despite of our ability to get beyond ourselves, particularly with racism and the racism that's built into our financial systems and everything else. What if we got beyond that? What we could do as a country? And so there's so many different reasons as to why, from a financial standpoint, from a business standpoint. But then when you just think about what's ultimately right for us to do because of our history as a country, it's important for us to be very intentional, not only about social investments, but specifically about investments in race that have a racial lens to them.
Okay. John, any other comments?
Hey, listen, I often say in my public comments about Rochdale, and it doesn't always make me the belle of the ball, but I say that we are an unapologetically Black-led CDFI that takes great pride in living its brand. And we have primarily minority or women-owned or veteran-owned vendors and contractors. We try to go out of our way to do that. We have our board meetings, and our operations manager will go out to the Black Latino-owned bakery to buy the refreshments for the day, because we just feel that's very important. And so when we look at things from a racial equity lens, listen, every day we get further and further away from the tragic murder of George Floyd. All of the efforts in this country, in regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I read somewhere where some organization had hired a chief diversity officer, and then 30 days later they let her go. And so 1/3 of those positions that came up in 2022, they're no longer there. And so something has to change. And so this is where I feel strongly that the CDFI movement must continue to lead by example. By the communities that they serve, by the people they employ, by the folks that are on their boards. I had a chance to spend time at OFN's Small Business Finance Forum in Chicago. First time in 10 years I've ever had a chance to go. But the number of Black and Latino and AAPI and Indigenous new CEOs there really made me realize two things. It made me realize that the future of this movement is strong, and that I was the oldest person amongst all of them. So I guess I don't know what generation that pushed me in, but definitely felt like the old man sitting up on the hill. But it's important, and I think it's something that while others may fall off or stop making that very important, that we need to continue to lead by example. And I know as long as Harold Pettigrew was the head of OFN, and that's always going to remain a constant. And I will always remain in that fight as well. So that's very important to me. And thank you for letting me chime in on that, Paul.
Sure.
Paul, you mind if I jump on?
Go ahead. Go right ahead.
I want to interrupt the flow, but I think what John says is it couldn't be more important, not only to state here, but to reinforce. It's our mission to carry it out, but not to carry it out alone. The point that John mentioned earlier, I think, is an important one. And I think for your listeners, where there is the ability to invest, if there's a desire to be focused on community investment, if there's a desire to have impact on these issue areas that we've outlined, we launched 2 years ago Finance Justice Fund, specifically with the lens of investing in racial, climate, and economic justice, and making sure that there's vehicles to get capital to folks like John who are doing it and making it happen on the ground. Because like he said, and I can tell you this from when I led a CDFI set for 7 years, having dynamic partnerships where capital is flowing into our institutions is where we make the most impact. We carry the burden because of our mission and desires to be in this industry. And it's an industry, by the way, our membership is roughly over 400 over 400 CDFIs. That's 10,000 employees just in our membership alone. And so when you look at the impact overall of folks that are on the ground helping to deploy capital into communities, it's pretty significant. We need partners to be able to do that, from philanthropies to family offices to foundations, corporate philanthropy, as well as corporate investment. We already leverage a lot of public investment. And with that public investment, every $1 that we have invested, we ultimately leverage that from anywhere from $4 to $8 more in investment. We need partners at the table to make sure that impact stories like John's can continue.
And Gloria, from your perspective as one of those partners, share with us your thoughts before we move on and close out today's program.
I want to just step back a second and just comment on the DE&I effort and the comment that John made and Harold followed up with. I think the commitment by the banking industry. It was sad to hear, John, about that example you made or gave, that there was a DE&I chief diversity officer put in place, and 30 days later that was gone. I think it's the consistency, right? I think consistency is what really, right? It helps you with your working out. It helps you with your diet. It helps you with everything. And I think consistent effort and consistent commitment toward D&I within organizations is what's going to move the needle. We did Acre conducted a sustainability census this year, and we had 1,400 respondents globally. Not enough, obviously not enough. But in terms of one of the metrics that we communicated to our clients and to our partners, there was approximately 60% of banking respondents. And again, we didn't segment out CDFIs, but banking respondents who said that the public commitments were moderately effective as it related to promoting DE&I internally, right? Moderately effective. The balance were, and it was over 25% that basically felt that their organizations were uncommitted, they were unsure, or publicly committed but ineffective. Okay, so and it was 25% that felt that they were publicly committed and somewhat effective. So I think we have a lot of work to do, right? To Harold's point, we have a tremendous amount of work to do to move the needle. So I just wanted to make that point, and just also to say that we're thinking about this. Acre is thinking about this also. How do we move the needle? How do we align purpose with some of the action that needs to take place to be effective in the mission? So anyway, I just wanted to make that comment, and to I guess the more broad question, Paul, that you asked. I think I'm extremely committed to this part of the banking industry. As I said, my career has served financial institutions globally and broadly over 20 plus years. So however I can be effective, right? And hearing some of these stories and how John is on the ground, right? Just as Harold was for 7 years, there are challenges every day, right? Whether it's credit challenges, lending challenges, people challenges, right? Talent challenges, right? In order to make sure that those communities that are underserved and those entrepreneurs, business owners, right, are getting the capital that they so necessarily need to move the needles for their communities. So anyway, I think that's probably the best answer I can give. I'm not sitting there making loans on John's team, right? But I know that it is critical that John have the right team members, just as the 400 CDFIs that are part of the OFN network need their talent, right? Because it's how you align. To me, how you align your mission and your purpose is really by ensuring that you have the right people to help drive that.
Okay, well, listen, for all three of you, let's let our listeners know where online they can learn more about Rochdale Capital, Opportunity Finance Network, and Acre. And how can followers of the Sustainable Finance Podcast contact you individually with questions about the topics that we've discussed in today's episode? And Gloria, let's start with you.
So yeah, I'll make it quick. Please go to the Acre website, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to share any details about our firm, but also just have a further conversation about this and any of the other topics that we've discussed over the Sustainable Finance Podcast episodes.
Great.
Off to you. Mm-hmm.
John?
Thanks so much, Paul. I would say the same. Look up, make sure it's John Holdsclaw IV on LinkedIn, as well as go to the rochdalecapital.org website. We have a contact us form there that you can fill out. We do read those, and you will always get a response from us, and then any other social media things. And then if you see me walking in the hall at OFN, stop me and let's have a conversation. And again, I'm a big believer in touch points are built one handshake at a time. And I always tell people, and people get tired of hearing it, but I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I do have a drawer full of knives. And so
Okay, Harold, how can folks get in touch with you?
Happy to. So OFN is an organization, manages over $1 billion in total assets. We do that through strategic partnerships and making sure that we get capital to invest in organizations like John, the one that John is leading. So happy to entertain any partnerships. You can find us at www.ofn.org. Conference registration right now. You can go to that website and find all that you would like to know about OFN as an institution, our network, stories of impact, ways to invest. To find me, LinkedIn, Harold Pettigrew. I'm pretty easy guy to find. Send me a note, always open to talking through strategic partnerships.
Okay, great. Well, listen, if there are any links that we can add or attach to this program, please have your team send those to us, and they'll be in the attachments tab at the Bright Talk channel. And I want to thank you all, John, Gloria, and Harold. And for our listeners, if you're ready to take your team to the next level, or if you're an experienced sustainability professional, visit the Acre website to get in touch. With the right individuals leading the way in your company, sustainability becomes more than a buzzword. Let Acre enable real change by embedding and developing purpose-driven people in your teams. And to our followers, join us again next week for another episode. I'm Paul Ellis, and this is the Sustainable Finance Podcast.